Super Bowl weekend, okay? So we've got a very good, a packed meeting, and we're gonna try to be out of here in time enough for not to interfere with the Super Bowl festivities. Okay, so if everyone is ready, for those of you who are new, we would like for you, if you would, put your name and email in the chat so that we can keep in touch with you. And at this time, I'm going to go over the agenda. And today's agenda, we're going to talk about the priorities in Georgia's legislative session with Major James Woodall, as well as, okay, bear with me here. Okay, here we go. I got paper and screen, okay? So with Major Woodall, and then we're going to talk about local redistricting in 2022, as well as an overview of the districts that are going to be flipped, contested, and protected. And then we're going to talk about the updates with necessary troubles, working committees. And last but not least, this afternoon, we will have a reading of poems from Amanda Gorman's new book. Okay, so without further ado, I would like to introduce is it Janet? No. Becky. No, I'm sorry.
It's actually going to be Aquaria who's going to run the next little piece, PJ.
Okay, all right then. So
No
without further ado, you all, please bear with me. Aquaria, take it on, take it over.
Thank you, TJ. Hi, Necessary Troublers. How are y'all doing today? Hope all is well. And so today we're going to talk about our session, our legislative priorities, and how we as Necessary Troublers can get involved. We have the awesome pleasure of hearing from Reverend James Major Woodall. When I read his bio, these are the things that stuck out to me. So first of all, Major is a faith leader. He's an associate minister at Pleasant Grove Baptist Church in Marietta, Georgia. He's a policy leader, a change agent. He serves as a public policy associate of the Southern Center for Human Rights. And he also works with Just Georgia, a collective of Georgia organizations, activists, faith leaders, attorneys, and justice-seeking community members. He's a political servant. He served as a former state president of the Georgia branch of NAACP, served on the state committee of the Democratic Party of Georgia. He also served as the deputy campaign manager for Francis Johnson in his 2018 bid for Congress, and he served for 3 years for Georgia State Representative Miriam Parris as her legislative aide. He's also a fighter. He has served as an intelligence analyst in the U.S. Army for 8 years. He's an entrepreneur. He's a founder and CEO of the Major Wish Group, LLC. He was named to Georgia Southern's 40 Under 40 and an alumnus of the year in 2020, and was named a 2021 Atlanta 500 leader by Atlanta Magazine. Now, for no further ado, what I'd like to introduce Major as he talks to us about things that are happening down at the state capitol. And the running theme that kept coming to my mind as I was preparing for today was last year was all things voter legislation, voter protection. Now it seems education has just really taken off. And so with that, Major, go ahead and get started and share with us some of those hot issues that are happening and how we can get involved.
Most definitely. Thank you, Aquaria, and to my fellow freedom fighters, good afternoon. I know we have a very eventful day with hopefully the Cincinnati Bengals taking the Super Bowl, the Lombardi Trophy. And so I won't belabor the point too long, as we Baptist preachers love to do. But I want to begin with what it is that we do at the Southern Center for Human Rights. We are all things criminal justice. And I particularly say criminal justice because what you often see at the Capitol are not issues related to criminal justice, but rather modifications to a criminal legal system that continues to do harm in so many ways. And so there's several, buckets that we engage under the Gold Dome as a Southern Center for Human Rights. One is really ending state-sanctioned violence. And many of you all remember I met Robin around the time Ahmaud Arbery was murdered. And we were trying to analyze ways in which the system failed, from the initial use of force incident to the prosecution itself. And we've really been engaged on that space and in that front for quite some time. And so right now there are about 5 or 6 bills that we support that would end state-sanctioned violence. It wouldn't necessarily end it, but it would help us, get to a situation where state-sanctioned violence is not as problematic. One is just a simple waiving of immunity for law enforcement officers, right? We don't have to talk about that. We also have, that's House Bill 69, House Bill 233 prohibits the no-knock search warrants. House Bill 313 creates a citizen review council to review complaints regarding state law enforcement agencies. House Bill 438 prevents any law enforcement officer with emergency suspension orders from exercising their powers as a law enforcement officer under that suspension order. And then 2 more is House Bill 505, which is one that I'm particularly interested in, and I've been working with in both chambers. House Bill 505, which revises the self-defense laws to establish a duty to retreat, which is something we saw for a host of reasons during 2020 and 2021. And then finally, 254, Senate Bill 254, which is the Senate's version of that bill. And we've been working with the chairman in both committees, both Chairman Brian Strickland in the Senate, as well as Chairman, we have Chairman Todd Paul Smith in the subcommittee, but then the House Judiciary Chairman Chuck Epstration. And so next we have the repealing of the death penalty. We have a piece of legislation, House Bill 485, which simply prohibits the use of capital punishment and replaces all current sentences with life without parole. We need as much help as we can get on that. And in fact, we are seeing some motivation, a little bit, not too much, but a little motivation to be able to get at least a hearing on that question, because that spans beyond just partisan affiliation. People of all faith walks, of all cultural backgrounds, have a concern about this use of the capital punishment sentence. Next, we have a mitigation of harm to incarcerated persons. And so there's House Resolution 165, which creates a standing commission with authorization to investigate conditions within the Department of Corrections. As you may have seen, the Southern Center for Human Rights led alongside several members of the House Democratic Caucus, as well as Senator John Ossoff and Senator Raphael Warnock, to lead a federal investigation to the conditions within Georgia's prisons. It is a crisis right now. I mean, we have folks not only committing suicide and unprecedented rates, but we also have homicides. So, person-to-person homicides are just as concerning for a number of reasons. And so when you have efforts like House Bill 1013, which is the Speaker's legislation to address mental health issues within the department, just within the general public as a whole, we also need to talk about mental health issues within Georgia's Department of Corrections. We also have several other pieces of legislation, but I won't belabor that point because most of those aren't really moving. But I will note House Bill 1092, which is sponsored by Representative Sharon Cooper, the chairman of the Health and Human Services Committee in the House, and that mandates deferral of sentences for pregnant women. And so we want to ensure that we're taking care of persons who are incarcerated and mitigating the harms that are provided there. Next, we have just the indigent defense bucket. And sorry, I'm going very fast. I'll share this information with you all in writing, but I just really want to highlight kind of some of the things that are moving. But we are very huge on improving the indigent defense system from the Georgia Department of Public Defenders, or the Georgia Council of Public Defenders. I might be butchering that name, but we really want to make sure, especially during a time when you have a governor and an attorney general who are saying, we want to make sure that we are investing all of our resources in prosecuting gang crime. Well, what that looks like is millions of dollars going to prosecutors, but there's no say nor equitable investment in our indigent defense, in our public defense system. And so we want to make sure that we're lifting that up. In fact, I'm going to talk briefly about that in bills that we're actually working on and engaged in. And I'll come back to that point next. as well as the obvious, fighting mass incarceration. What do it takes to decrease the amount of people in prison? Because if you're talking about rising in crime, but you also have a rise in federal population, prison population, as well as state, that tells us that being incarcerated does not aid in public safety, right? And so what helps us, what effective tools and research and evidence-based treatment that is available to our state and its taxpayers so that we're not footing the bill for ineffective policies. And just mass incarceration is one of them. And so declassification of marijuana, we have the prohibition of the use of private prisons, raising the age of juvenile court jurisdiction to include 17-year-olds, as well as reducing the maximum penalty for possession of marijuana as well. And then finally, we have eliminating the barriers to reentry to make sure that people who are reentering our communities are doing so in a way that's both responsible, effective, as well as impactful. And there's a host of things that you'll see on the list that I'll send out to you all on tomorrow morning. But I want to fast forward and go to several bills that we have followed over the course of the session that have been progressing throughout the legislative process just this week. And these are the ones that we have been particularly interested and engaged on, working with the sponsors as well as advocates behind the scenes and in front of the scenes. One is Senate Bill 359, which was sponsored by Senator John Albers, which expands the venue in criminal street gang prosecutions. It also expands the statutory authority under GBI, as well as a whole bunch of other things. And it creates what we're most concerned about, creating the additional felonies that enhances existing offenses, as well as infringing on judicial discretion. And so what all that means is you're adding to the mass industrial complex, right? The mass industrial prison complex. And it is doing so in a way that's attempting to respond to this quote unquote rise in crime in Atlanta. So what we're trying to do is push back on that for a number of reasons, one of which has a provision in that legislation that talks about mandatory maximums. We always talk about mandatory minimums, but this legislation puts mandatory maximums on certain offenses, which is egregious for a number of reasons. And so we're definitely pushing back, and we expect that bill to be heard in the Senate Judiciary no later than Tuesday. It'll be probably tomorrow, but no later than Tuesday, you'll hear that in the Senate Judiciary Committee. That is Senate Bill 359, and we'll be putting out a call to action on that piece of legislation. Secondly, is a bill that I'm literally working on right before I hopped on this call. It's House Bill 1134. 1134 is sponsored by Chairman Chuck Efstration, and that legislation gives the Attorney General concurrent jurisdiction over the prosecution of offenses under OCGA 1615-4, which is Georgia's gang RICO statute. And what it does is it gives the authority to the Attorney General to come into local judicial districts or circuits, and allowing the deputization of peace officers to help aid in that prosecution or in the prosecution of those cases. On the face, it looks great, right? It looks not problematic. You give the Attorney General concurrent jurisdiction, so what? Well, the concern is we have right now the expectation about 700 cases, not to include, to include RICO cases, but it includes other cases too. But the current caseload in which every circuit has a backlog, let's be very clear, but the Attorney General has about 700 cases that they expect to prosecute just this year. Sorry, my dogs are playing right in front of me, guys. But about 700 cases right now that the Attorney General can prosecute, but is currently not doing so for reasons unbeknownst to us. They're all fit into what we call conflict cases, in which the local prosecutor is unable to prosecute that case or try that case due to a conflict of interest. And we've seen it happen in which there was a prosecution, particularly under Georgia's 1615-4 statute, which is the RICO gang prosecution statute, in which the local district attorneys, particularly in Augusta, Richmond County, had gotten elected to DA, but prior to his election, he's a private attorney representing clients tried under that particular statute. And so when he became DA, he could not prosecute those cases simply because there would be a conflict of interest. And so those people have been sitting in pretrial detention for some long as 5 years. 5 years that they've sat in jail waiting on anything to happen in their case, but it can't because there's no prosecutor assigned. And so the judge in that case, who was former state senator and also chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Jesse Stone, pretty much issued a notice that he would issue a rule nasa, which essentially says If you don't respond and appoint somebody to this case in 60 days from February 1st, we're going to dismiss the charges. And so that's a concern for a number of reasons, right? If these people committed criminal offenses, they should be given due process. If they're not guilty, right, and they've not committed a crime, they should also be given due process so that they can go on about their lives. But simply waiting in pretrial detention without any determination of guilt or innocence, even though the criminal justice system doesn't determine innocence, that is an egregious error on the part of the state. And so we're raising so many concerns, to include the lack of resources given equitably to the to the Georgia Public Defenders, right? If you're going to give nearly $8 million in additional appropriation to not only the Attorney General's office, but also the Georgia Bureau of Investigations and all those kinds of things, you have to give equitable amount of resources to public defenders. And in addition to that, you also need to ensure that now that they're not only dealing with that local prosecutor, they're dealing with the Attorney General. We want to make sure that what we call Brady disclosures, which means the evidence that's being changed from the prosecutor to the defense counsel, is also representative of those changes. And so there's a lot of issues related to just the concurrent jurisdiction and giving 12 peace officers to the Attorney General. There are so many things that is happening in practice that needs to be addressed as well. I'll move on to House Bill 1137, which is another bill that we are working on that requires some attention. That is sponsored by Representative Bill Werkheiser, and it removes the Georgia Department of Corrections from being exempt from administrative review. And what that essentially allows for us to do is to, well, not us, but for persons who are incarcerated, is to be able to file grievances, and it makes the process less complicated and less complex so that they can be able to receive some kind of relief if there's need for them to sue the Department of Corrections for, various violations of their civil rights. We've seen these cases often here at the Southern Center for Human Rights, but oftentimes when we take them to federal court, they dismiss them because before you can get relief on the federal level, you have to exhaust all administrative remedies. Right now, under Georgia law, it is nearly impossible for you to exhaust them because the process is so just arbitrary and complex. And so this is in hopes or intention of this is to be able to make that process a little bit more streamlined. Two more, and then I'll stop. I know this is a lot, but I'm trying to go as fast as I can. Senate Bill 257, which is sponsored by Senator Tyner Anderson, is a bill that has been voted on by the Senate and is now in the House and that vote was a 48-3. And Senator Tyner Anderson passed the bill last year in 2020, Senate Bill 288, that created opportunities for restriction of criminal records. And so this is simply just trying to attempt to clean that legislation up. Minor issues that arose since the implementation of that bill. And so we're grateful for her, as well as our partners at the Georgia Justice Project for their continued work to eliminate barriers for reentry. The final piece of legislation that I mentioned to you all today, again, is House Bill 1092, sponsored by Representative Sharon Cooper. And that's the newest version of the Women's Care, Child Care Alternatives, Resources, and Education Act. And that's an effort led by our partners at Restore Her to end prison births. And so House Bill 1092 would require judges to defer the prison sentences of pregnant women until 6 weeks after they give birth. And that did pass out of the House Health and Services Committee and is now headed to the floor of the House of Representatives this week for full consideration. The last thing I will say, and I'll yield for any questions, is we have the budget. So amended fiscal year 2022's budget will be on the floor this week. And we are highlighting particularly there's $600 million in taxpayer and bond dollars to open 2 new prisons. $600 million. Imagine what we could do with $600 million to address why people are in prison to begin with. And so we're lifting that up to ask for any help that we can to get the word out about that. But then secondly, as it relates to the Department of Corrections, we have 1013, which is again the speaker's legislation. It's called the Parity and Mental Health Act, and essentially what the effort is there is to address the mental health issues, creating a database for persons who are trained in mental health, whether they're psychologists, nurses, behavioral health specialists, etc. And there's also creating a kind of like a diversion program so that law enforcement who engage folks who are having mental health episodes or suspected of having some kind of disability or mental health condition would be able to divert from arresting those persons and instead send them to a medical health provider or mental health provider, which is good. But there are also some things in there about a juvenile, I guess, repository, if you will, as well. So that also includes folks who are under the age of 18 and 17. So we're working on that, but we want to really, and our part in that is making sure that we're actually addressing what's happening inside of the Georgia Department of Corrections, because that's not including what's happening inside of those facilities. And so that's really where we are with that. And so with that, I'll pause and see if we have any questions. I see the chat kind of going crazy, so I'll start looking through that. But Aquaria, I'll turn it back over to you to see if we got any questions.
Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate that. And definitely you highlighted a couple of call to actions where we can get involved. And I know you mentioned around the capital punishment. You also talked a little bit about a bill where they're raising the age of 17. I guess now maybe going through the juvenile justice system, but raising that where they're no longer in that. I don't know if you can expound a little bit on that. And then just wanted to know, as we do our call to action, what do you find is the most effective way for us to lift our voices to the committee members or people that sponsor the bill?
So House Bill 272 is sponsored by Representative Mandy Ballinger, who is the chairwoman of juvenile justice in the House. And that's a bill from last session, but it raises the age of juvenile court jurisdiction to include 17-year-olds. Right now, it's only 18-year-old. I mean, it's only, I think it's 16 and below. And so if you include 17-year-olds, then they'll also be part of the opportunities that are presented there in that court. But as it relates to just advocacy in general, the two most important things is one, data, right? We need data to be able to fight back against some of these things, because those passionate, emotional responses to this legislation isn't great, but it does not move Republicans. I'm just going to be very partisan here. It doesn't move Republicans. And so with Republicans controlling both chambers, it is important that we are able to justify our positions using research, case law, and data. And we've seen it help, right? When we took, for instance, 1134, which is the Attorney General's concurrent jurisdiction bill, and we said we got concerns because of what's happening right now. And you point to people sitting in jail for 5 years, that is different than you saying, I just don't think the Attorney General needs more power, right? It emotes a different response. Secondly, going directly to these legislators before hearings and being able to present that data and provide input to the legislation that they have, and then showing up to testify at these hearings is equally important. And so you can't do one without the other. We see a lot of people come all the time and testify, but their efforts are landing on deaf ears because they're not engaging with the legislators outside of the committee. And so by the time they get to the committee, they already know how they're going to vote. And it is really a waste of our time. So we have to do both, because it shows that people that are watching those committees know that there is opposition, but the sponsors and the legislators who are voting also respect you more, and they call on you on a more regular basis to provide your input if they know that you're showing up consistently and you have legitimacy to what you share every time.
I appreciate that. And so I'm going to ask Janet if she wants to come off mute or if she wants me to read her question. Janet Grant,
Sure.
I think you had a question.
Yeah, thanks, Aquaria. And thanks for being here, James. Nice to see you. My question is, I've just been really struck by how ironic it is that we have this, huge focus this session on law and order, and yet we also are seeing, real loosening on the gun controls. What are your thoughts about that? And have you had any success with pointing out how ironic that is?
I want to be careful about how I said this. So the conversation surrounding, guns everywhere, the Second Amendment, is very nuanced, because if we use, again, the emotional responses that we see in public, discourse, we're not going to be effective. But when you look at the policy, and I would never say this publicly, and let me preface what I'm about to say, but when you look at the policy that they're proposing, they're attempting to do one of two things. One, they're trying to, of course, get to their base, right? But they're also trying to maintain what's already happening in practice right now. And that's a fight that they're having internally, but the more we fight against it, I fear the worse it'll become. And the reason I say that, as someone who carries a firearm, there is literally no difference under the proposed legislation that specifically Jason and Vitarte proposed, which I think will be the vehicle of choice, versus what we're already having experience right now in Georgia. And so what I mean by that, there's already no trade. We have one of the least restrictive, like there's really nothing they can do that'll make it even worse than we already have it. And that's really at the bottom. And they're doing that intentionally. And so I don't know if it's worth our efforts if we're not really focused on that particular area to push back on that. I think there are some way more egregious things happening that require and demand our attention and our efforts and our capital than fighting this really nothing burger. Even though it does change some things, they still maintain the permit process. You just don't need a permit to carry concealed, in these expanded jurisdictions. Hopefully that answers the question. But again, I would not say that publicly. We're still against deregulation of firearms and those things, we are. But the reality is that legislation that they're choosing is not going to be doing what it says we think it'll do.
Okay.
And
Thanks
people
for
would
that
disagree with
perspective.
me when I say that, but I just want to give you, my experience and how I've analyzed the legislation. Now, what I will say, Janet, to that point is the legislation that I mentioned from B. Wynn as well as Tanya Anderson around use of force. That is our interest, because if you have standards in which persons who are able to de-escalate situations of use of force are not forced or not legally mandated to do so, then you are adding something to this conversation of the Second Amendment that is different than what I just said, right? And so what we want to do is to be able to evaluate, and I think you all will be able to help with this, is how many of these cases are being granted immunity from prosecution under Georgia Stand Your Ground law, and what are the demographics of the persons who are granted immunity, right? Versus people who are not granted immunity but end up going to trial, but then are acquitted on those charges, right, after paying tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars in the private defense, or if they don't get the resources to have a zealous defense, how many of these people are actually getting convicted, even though they said, I was defending myself? And so we need that data. And this is like a 2-3 year undertaking, but we need the data from the circuits to be able to raise the claim that there's a racial inequity involved in Georgia Stand Your Ground law. We know it's there. We just got to have the facts and the data to support that. And so the leadership of both chambers are very much so interested in that conversation, as we met with both Leader Dugan and Leader Burns. But we have to get the data, because they'll listen to that more than they just listen to our anecdotal testimony.
Thank you for that. We have another question for Robin. I don't know if you want to come off mute to share your question. And then Sandra had a question about capital punishment and its cost.
Thanks. Hey, Major.
Hey, Robin.
Hi. Thanks again for being here. Quick question with regard to House Bill 1137 regarding Department of Corrections. Given what's happening in the prisons right now, is there bipartisan support for that?
Yes. So the background between 1137, it comes from Kim Schofield and Josh McLaurin specifically. And what they did was they had a more omnibus bill that included 1137, but 1137 on its own, there could be some concerns about practicality, but overall it is a bipartisan bill. So Werkheiser, since he's a chairman, he took the bill and said, I'm going to carry it. But Kim Schofield is second signer on that legislation. So that's a very simple bipartisan support piece of legislation. The conversation in the Senate Judiciary Committee was, well, what states are doing this? The only other state that does this is California. That was interesting to have that conversation in that committee. A Republican saying, well, the only other state does it, California. And then secondly is, why was the Georgia Department of Corrections exempted from being subjected to administrative review in the first place? And that is a conversation that we are currently having. But overall, to your point, to your question, it is bipartisan. But the thing that we also have to keep in mind is that most of these legislators are not attorneys. They do not understand the administrative review process unless they are. And so you might be talking foreign language to most of the folks who are tracking and following this legislation. But the people who are incarcerated, the people who are trying to get some kind of injunctive relief because of various violations of their humanity and their constitutional rights, are very much so grateful and looking forward to some kind of relief. So that, you got the PLRA, which is I think it's a Prison Litigation Reform Act or something like that, that essentially prohibits people who are incarcerated from challenging, various conditions within Georgia's Department of Corrections, as well as other Department of Corrections across the nation. And so there are stopgaps and difficulties in doing so, but we're trying to make it easier for people to get relief if and when necessary.
Thanks.
Okay, we got one last question that's going to come from Sandra Menes. If you want to come off mute to ask your question, thanks.
Hi, Major, thanks so much for being here again. Very helpful. Given that our perception is that Republicans are very concerned about not raising taxes and keeping costs down, and since it's generally accepted that capital punishment costs more than life in prison, does that not make a good case against capital punishment?
Yes and no. I think capital punishment is more so one of the ethical kind of conversations that you'll have maybe once every generation when it comes to public policy. That's one. I mean, you could talk about the expenses all day. I mean, it costs more to incarcerate somebody in general as opposed to paying someone or paying for the rehabilitation of a person and not having to exert that cost over the long period of time. That's an argument we've made for years, for generations, but we're still seeing the cost of incarceration rise. We're still seeing the rise in prison populations across the nation, including the federal system, right, led by Democrats, right? So the question must become why, as opposed to, we know it is, but the question now has to become, why are we so willing to pay the exorbitant amounts of incarceration when we know it doesn't work? I think that's the question that we need to ask in order to inform our policy strategy around how we fight back against it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you just sharing with us from the criminal justice perspective. And also, I've placed your email in the chat for people who still have additional questions and wish to reach out. Again, thank you so much for your time and have fun watching the Super Bowl.
Thank you all so much. And Ms. Mary asked a question, and I just want to raise this: who is gathering the data necessary to possibly appeal to Republicans? Two things on that. One, we're not just appealing to Republicans because some Democrats need help on these questions too. But two is that there are several coalitions that are organized, like the Georgia Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, the trial lawyers, the Prosecutor Attorneys Council, Restore Her, Southern Center for Human Rights, Southern Poverty. I mean, there are so many amazing organizations doing this work. And so we work, but we're only so much. And so we need, capacity to get some of the data research done so that we can use it in ways that are helpful to our cause. So hopefully that answers your question. But again, my information is in the chat. I would love to stay in touch. Robin, thank you so much for all the work that you do. Janet, Aquaria, all of you all. And have a good rest of your evening, your weekend.
Thanks, Major.
Again, thank you so much, Major Woodall and Aquaria. We learned so much today. It was a lot of information to try to process. I was trying to take notes and touch on some of the more, the more important points. But we do have, according to the information, we do have some action items from the Major's presentation. At this time, I'd like to turn the session over to Janet, who is going to give us an overview of the districts, what to flip, what to contest, and what to protect.
Actually, I'm going to be covering local redistricting, PJ, and I'm going to share my screen here.
Okay.
That's okay. I think Karen's up next with that. So
okay.
It's coming.
Karen McCown. We turn it over to Karen. Yeah.
So, well, thanks, PJ, and thanks again for having me. It feels like this is like a monthly topic here with redistricting. Eventually, we're gonna probably peter out a little bit here, and although the work is definitely not done. So today I want to share about what's happening with local redistricting. Last month, I touched just a little bit on it, that it was going to be coming. And I have to say that even at that time, I didn't realize the kinds of issues that we might see coming out with local redistricting. So I think it is important for you all to be aware, and we'll talk a little bit about some actions that that may be helpful as well. So just to remind you, and some of this is repeat from last time. So we went through the special session last fall, and redistricting happened for the congressional and the state House and state Senate. But now we are into local redistricting, and that was delayed because of the census delays and the special session delays. But it's very much a focus now in the regular session. Governor Kemp and Speaker Ralston set a date of February 18th to be done with the local redistricting that's going to happen this session. And that's really because of being able to meet the Secretary of State deadline to have counties enter this information into the systems to be ready for candidate filing, which starts on March the 7th. So we'll talk again in a minute about redistricting that will continue to happen after February 18th, but the redistricting that will be impacting the 2022 elections is supposed to be done by the end of next week. So just a reminder, in 2019, there was a bill passed, Senate Bill 177, that set up a new process for local redistricting. And essentially it said that while counties, county school boards, municipalities still could propose their own maps, they would be required to go through a state approval process, kind of a technical review process, and then go forward with local legislation for legislative approval. So we're also looking at a new process this time around. So this time, the county commission and the county boards of education are really the focus this session. And that is, as I said, because that's what's on the election agenda for 22. The municipal level, so the city elections and other municipality kinds of districts, those will be relevant for the 2023 elections. And so we anticipate that there will continue to be local redistricting, not just through the rest of this session, but next year as well. And in fact, kind of history tells us in Georgia that local redistricting typically takes about 3 years to actually complete. And you can see with how many entities there are, that that's an issue. The flip side of that is that we also know that there are entities out there that haven't redistricted in a long, long time and need to be in order to really be achieving the one person, one vote requirement. And for instance, Doraville just announced that they're redistricting, and they haven't redistricted in 40 years. So you know that there have been changes, and that population changes that required redistricting in these municipalities. So right now we have over 146 local bills. Luckily, through the Georgia Redistricting Alliance, we have a fellow who is tracking all of these for us. But we have 146 local bills. Almost all of those are for county commissions and Board of Education. But with 159 counties in this state, you can see that there are a lot that are still either not filed and should have been filed by the end of last week, or will be yet to come. So most of those are moving through the General Assembly as local legislation, which is a whole process in and of itself. Essentially, A map gets sponsored by the local delegation. It gets passed by the majority of that delegation for that particular county, and then goes on a consent calendar, and both the House and the Senate approve it just on a consent calendar. However, that we have really unprecedented process this year of, as I like to quote Mary Margaret Oliver, Representative Oliver, as saying raw power is being used by the majority party to move local maps off of that normal local legislation process and move it into a general bill process and replace what are maps at the local level that have been agreed to by the local delegation with maps that are partisan in nature. And let me give you an example. And you've probably seen some about Gwinnett County in the AJC, and other newspapers have been covering it pretty extensively. And in fact, some of these have also gotten national attention. So Gwinnett County Commission, which by the way is 5 commissioners, all people of color, all elected within the last couple of cycles in Gwinnett, moving from a Republican majority, and in fact, all Republicans moving and flipping that to Democrats, and reflecting the diversity of Gwinnett. So that county commission held 5 public hearings on the map that they proposed. And that's the one in the upper map there is what they proposed. And it's very similar to the map that is currently in place in Gwinnett. They took public comment, they made a few changes. Then the Gwinnett legislative delegation hosted, after that, they hosted 2 public hearings. Again, got a lot of feedback. And went forward with the map that you see there. It was filed by Representative Sam Park, who's the delegation chair, and was approved by the majority of the delegation. And normally that would have meant that it just flies through, gets on the local consent calendar and gets passed, goes over to the Senate. The same thing would happen there. However, in this case, the chair of the Government Affairs Committee made a floor motion to move that map and not to have it voted on the local consent calendar, but rather to move it to her committee. And once we got to that committee a day or 2 later, that map was replaced with the one there on the bottom right that was drawn by Representative Bonnie Rich, one of the few Republicans left in Gwinnett County. And as you can see, what happened is they drew a northern district, and Bonnie Rich got up and testified that she needed to have a district that reflected the people that voted for her. And in fact, that district is over 50% for voting age population, over 50% white, and much more Republican leaning. Which again, does not reflect the diversity that we have seen happen in Gwinnett. So that committee passed that map out, all partisan lines. It went to the House floor. A lot of debate on the House floor, passed out there. Same thing happened in the Senate just the end of last week. And now it's on its way to Governor Kemp for signature. The same exact thing is happening for Cobb County. That is coming to the House floor this week. The exact same thing with Government Affairs taking that on for both their county commission and Board of Education maps. And coming out of the Senate the end of last week for Augusta Richmond, the exact same thing has happened as well. So you can see these are counties that are large, are Democratic mostly now, and have been, really changing with the demographics that we see here in Georgia. Another concerning thing for Gwinnett County is that there was one other Republican from Gwinnett County in the Senate who filed a bill, Senate Bill 369, that has now passed out of the Senate and is pending in the House, to make the Gwinnett Board of Education nonpartisan. So they have actually agreed on a bipartisan basis to the Board of Education maps in Gwinnett County, but this bill has passed, and on the surface, that sounds fine, you know, that we would agree that maybe boards of education should be nonpartisan. The problem with that is it moves the election to May from November. And think about that. For election, turnout is much less in May and is usually much more conservative. So let me give you a couple other examples. Athens, Clark County, again, last fall, the commissioners there, they have 10 commissioners. They charged their Board of Elections with drawing a new district map, and they passed it 6-3, which would be majority. However, Athens County is unique in that while Athens County went 71% Biden in the last election, the 4 of the 5 House delegation members, House and Senate for Athens, Clark County, are Republicans because of the way they have gerrymandered that county. And in fact, it's even going to be worse with the new maps. It's going to be 6 delegation members, 5 of which are Republicans. But they decided that they were going to go forward with their own map, and they justified it saying that there wasn't consensus since it wasn't unanimous coming out of the Board of Commission. So they came up with their own map. In that, 3 of the 10 commissioners, the ones that were elected most recently and most progressive, are drawn into even numbered districts, and so they can't run again. They can't run. They're up for re-election this year. They can't run until 2024. And concerning from a citizen perspective, 2 of the 3 addresses in that county are going to be moving districts. The one Democratic delegation member did propose another map. The commission voted 8-2 to approve it. However, he got no traction when bringing that back to the House. So that has passed out of the House now and is pending in the Senate. And then lastly, I want to, since many of us are DeKalb County folks, I want to just bring you up to date on what's happening here in DeKalb County. So again, we had a county commission that had public meetings. My beef to them is that they weren't advertised very well and weren't very well attended. But a number of issues were raised about the maps that they had brought forward. They ended up approving, they'd made a few tweaks, they ended up approving those, and they were sent to the state for the reapportionment office to do their technical review. Those technical updates were made, and the House delegation for DeKalb County has now hosted 3 public meetings over the last couple of weeks and are moving forward with local legislation. We don't have any Republicans in elected office in DeKalb County, so we think we have at least a protection, I guess, from some of the things that we're seeing happening like in Gwinnett County, although technically any other member of the legislature could do something like that. So anyway, the House is moving forward with this as local legislation. However, just to, you've probably seen some of this news. On the Senate side, Senator Emanuel Jones, separately than what the House was doing, which was working with the commission maps and getting those technically corrected and getting public input, Senator Jones had the LCRO develop an alternative map that would do away with super districts, in which we've had historically here in DeKalb County. And this is the map that he proposed. He was not going to impact any incumbents, but it obviously is a big change to have the super districts gone. Recently now, Legislative Council has issued a memo saying that this change would require a referendum of the voters. And so we don't believe this will be able to go forward. And I don't think he has the support of the Senate delegation, and definitely not for the House delegation. So this is still in process, though. This is the bill that's still sitting filed in the Senate. And we expect this to be, dealt with over this week before that February 18th deadline. And for those of you that are interested, the CEO, Michael Thurman, has now appointed a chair of a charter review committee to address an overall charter review for DeKalb County, which has not been done in, I guess, decades, literally. And this issue of super districts will be on that agenda as well. So what can we do? A number of things. First of all, we as we recognize the complexity of local redistricting and the need for folks to have more information to get involved, we developed a toolkit at Fair Districts, and you can see the bit.ly address there. It's also posted on the front page of our website, and this will give you a little more information about this. As I said, although the deadline for what we're doing right now is February the 18th, this is a process that's going to be ongoing. And I really encourage every citizen to understand for your community what is relevant in terms of redistricting. Redistricting at the local level, these are districts that impact your and representatives that impact your everyday life, maybe much more so than what's happens at a congressional or state level. So, so check out our toolkit. Join our action team at Fair Districts if you haven't already. We do have an action alert that will be coming out here in the next day or two about actions to be taken related to these particular bills. For instance, you can see this was the bottom right there is an action alert for the Gwinnett folks. Because that bill has been all the way through the legislature now, asking folks to call Governor Kemp and ask him to veto this. Governor Kemp apparently in the past has vetoed other legislation because he felt it was impinging on local control. So we want to remind him of that and ask him to veto these particular issues. We've also heard through the grapevine that he's not real happy about this in an election year to have the kind of upset that is happening related to counties like Gwinnett. So that is definitely an action that we want to encourage folks to take. And then come join us at our next town hall on February 28th. We're going to have Representative Sam Park, who is the chair of the Gwinnett delegation. He's also an attorney. He's predicting there will be legal action, by the way, in Gwinnett, and I'm hearing the same thing, certainly for Augusta. So unfortunately, we end up with these kind of actions. We end up with, court actions in results. So with that, I'll stop sharing and see if there are any questions. Thanks, Mary Lou, for putting in the links. Okay, well, if there's no questions, I will hand it back to you, PJ.
Janet, thank you so very much for that update. And especially, I'm interested in DeKalb County because I'm a resident and I just wonder what bee is under the bonnet of Emmanuel Jones as to why he is going above and beyond the call of duty to get rid of the super districts. Okay, we know that they work. Okay, I mean, if it weren't for them, some of us wouldn't have any representation because we've had personal experiences with commissioners that were assigned to that we're in their district. We call them for help and they don't come. So if it had not been for the super district, we would have no representation. So we're watching that closely, and whatever action steps that you need from us, please let us know. Okay.
Yeah. I think it's worth a conversation, but the way he went about it was definitely not the way it should happen.
Yes. Okay. Well, again, thank you so much. And now I'd like to turn the program over to Becky.
Thank you, PJ.
You're welcome.
And a big shout out to Janet for all their incredible and incredibly good hard work in terms of Fair Districts. And I wanted to take a minute and just position what we're talking about a little bit in terms of the Troubler work plan for 2022, which we talked about at the last meeting. And I want to just kind of remind folks that what we had talked about at the last meeting in terms of the work for this quarter are some of the things that you have either just heard or will be hearing about, like the legislative advocacy, like the tracking of legislation. You'll be hearing about the voter protection work. You'll be hearing about contest every race, the candidate directory, DeKalb Dems. There are a couple of those, so some of that is ongoing. There are a couple of pieces of what we thought we might be doing now that are a little bit on hold. Jasmine Clark's postcards have been put on hold for some kind of legal reasons for a few weeks. We are waiting for the Abrams and the Warnock campaign to really start recruiting volunteers. So some things are underway, some things are a little bit on hold. And I wanted to take a minute and talk about two other things that we had already said we'd be working on in this first quarter. And one is that we are about to have, and I'm going to share my screen here for a minute, the diversity, equity, and inclusion training for necessary trouble, called Moving Forward Together. Led by Angelique Burke. This will be, the first one will be 2 weeks from today. And there are several of us that just recently did a smaller workshop. A few of us did a small workshop with her. And I want to say that she is lovely. The experience was powerful. It was moving. I think we all came through it at the end feeling more deeply connected. She is wise, she's anchored, she's grounded, she's good, she's skillful. And I really want to invite folks, and this workshop is specifically for necessary trouble. And even if you have taken 100 DEI workshops and 100 online anti-racism workshops, this is really about our group. What I would invite is that even if you've done a whole lot of these before, I would invite you to do this one as a way of supporting and investing in necessary trouble, because it's really about our becoming more connected with each other and moving forward together. And if you would register sooner rather than later, it would be a great assistance to those of us who are helping in planning that. Mary Lou is going to drop this in the link and drop the link in the chat, and you can go and you can register right now, and then you can come right back, and you won't have to disconnect from Zoom. So thank you very much. And so that's one piece. The other piece is some of what was going to be going on right now is us getting a sense of the landscape of legislative districts for 2022. We're not going to be deciding on these right away until after the primary, but really, really important to be getting a sense of where are their districts to pick up, where are their opportunities, where are their competitive districts. And Karen McCown, data maven extraordinaire, has done an amazing job of pulling together and integrating this. And so I'm going to turn this over to her with our great gratitude. And I'm also going to bring up her screen. Thank you.
Oh, good, because
Karen.
that's what I was.
I gotcha. Wait a minute. Just give me a minute here.
All righty.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Becky. As Becky said, we are just starting to look at the changes that will that will affect elections based on the districting that was completed in the fall of 2021. So the new districts, and as you already all know, we will have new state House, state Senate, and congressional districts in time for the 2022 election. Every candidate every incumbent in those districts, if they want to run for election again, has to refile and be, and run for office in 2022. And they have to file for office by March. So, there were significant changes to some of the maps based on the 2020 census and the idea that there's 1 million more people in Georgia than there were, and the population density has also shifted around. So this caused some shift in the districts, and people are still moving around. Candidates, incumbents are deciding, might have been moved to another district. They might have be retiring to run for something else, or just retiring. So it's a very different landscape than the one that we've been working with for the last couple of cycles. The most opportunities for Democrats have ended up in the state house. And there's some really very good ones. And the reasons for that could fill another whole presentation. So I'm not going to go into that. But there, as we'll see in a moment, there are some very good opportunities for pickup, as well as some seats that Democrats need to defend. There are many fewer competitive districts in the state Senate. Or in Congress, there are no competitive districts. And I'm sure you've heard more about that. We can talk about there's really only one competitive district in the state Senate, and it is one that is currently occupied by a Democrat who's actually going to run for a House seat. There are no competitive districts in Congress. I know you are all familiar with what happened with Congressional District 6, where Lucy McBath is currently the incumbent. And again, that's a story that could fill an entire presentation. Her district was completely turned inside out and reconstituted. It's not great. And for these reasons, the fact that, any competitive districts or any districts that are even remotely competitive for Congress are in rural Atlanta or in rural Georgia. So there really are very minimal opportunities for nested districts in Metro Atlanta. So next slide, please. So without further ado, I'm going to talk a little bit first about the state house. The current house composition is 103 districts that are Republican, 77 that are Democratic. Our model predicts that we could have 98 Republican districts to 82 Democratic districts, some of which are flippable. Republican districts, which are flippable from to Democratic. And those are the list of them, and I will talk more about that later. And then the competitive districts are that, again, I will talk more about on the next slide. We have divided into two tiers. There's most competitive, which are right around a 50% Democratic voter line, and less competitive. That the competitive landscape we're considering is roughly 45% Democratic to 55% Democratic. To do this, we considered models that were created by not only Fair Districts Georgia, which, and there is some of this analysis is published on our website, so anyone can see it. But we also looked at some of our partner organizations, America Votes and the House Democratic Caucus to determine what districts might be in play. So go to the next slide. So again, we have both, as PJ was saying, districts that are flippable, districts that are more or less competitive, and districts that may need to be defended or are challenger districts where we might be able to pick up a seat. And the shaded area here is the partisan lean districts that are between around 45%. I've cheated a little, rounding up and down. I'll tell you what, click the next button again. So this, whoops, no, go back one. So this list is sorted by partisan lean, and it's the average of the percent Democratic vote over the last 3 major elections in 2018, 2020, and the Warnock election in 2021. So you can see, and on average, how many, the percentage of Democratic votes in each district. So you can start to see based on, whether there is a 50%, was a 50% Democratic vote percentage. Those districts are predicted to have a Democratic outcome, and below 50% is expected to have could have a Republican outcome. Again, right around the 50% mark, it's very competitive. It really could go either way. If you look at like 3.5 points on either side of 50%, that's why this is shaded in orange, because again, these really could flip either way. The yellow on either side really could also flip either way, but they're much safer districts for either Republicans or Democrats. When you start to get into, like a 55% partisan lean. So that's why we have sorted these into a tier 1 districts and tier 2 districts. The difference in shading, whether it's light or dark, is, the vivid orange or yellow districts are in the metro area. So I was trying I didn't want to disregard districts that were in rural Georgia, but I wanted to concentrate really in the metro area. Some of these districts have existing incumbents who remained in the districts. Some of these districts are actually open because the incumbent has either been moved to another district or retired. In the House especially, districts were renumbered and reconstituted. For instance, I was in House District 83. I am still in the same district with the same incumbent, but now it is called House District 89. So it's kind of confusing. So we've got some real pickup opportunities here for districts that have been reconstituted, or someone didn't like someone very much and really wanted to get rid of them. In which case, in the where we have like a 60 to 70% partisan lean. So we really should be able to pick up those districts. We might be able to pick up this district, which has about a 55% partisan lean. There are districts we need to protect. Jasmine Clark, where, Mary Robichaux, who's sitting right at 49%, that could flip Republican. So there are districts we need to protect. Other districts that are also could be flipped, but that are a much heavier lift when you start to get down into the 45% range. So go to the next slide. So this is a little illustration of where the most competitive districts are in the metro area. And you can see here that a lot of them are concentrated in the North Fulton County and North Gwinnett County area. Okay, there's one district that actually was teleported all the way from Athens, District 117, that was reconstituted in Henry County, south of Atlanta. Obviously, Houston Gaines is not is not running for that, although he was the incumbent when it was in Athens. So there are three Democratic competitive districts that again are right around the 50% mark, and three Republican districts that again are just below the 50% mark, that we could that could be tipped either way, probably. Okay. Yeah, it was teleported. Go to the next slide, and I'll stop for questions in just a second. In the state Senate, again, many fewer competitive districts, and really only one really flippable district, and District 7 and District 14 are to D. So the tier 1 most competitive, you probably have heard about Michelle Au's district. She was this little purple spot up here in the North Metro area, which was converted from a Democratic leaning district to a barely Republican leaning district. Michelle Au is now going to run for the House. As far as I know, I don't know if there's a candidate for this district yet. So it's not a lost cause, but it was changed. Go to the next slide. So this is that same list for the state Senate. And you'll see it's much, much shorter than the one in the House. There are a couple of districts that are open and flippable and have, from 55 to 60% partisan lean, Democratic percentage vote. We could, if we can't flip those, we've probably got bigger trouble than those districts. Those are in the Atlanta metro area. Michelle Au's district in Johns Creek up in the Gwinnett County area, they've cranked that down to like a 47% partisan lean. So it's not a lost cause, but it was up at, I think it was around 52. And then this is kind of, I'm cheating a bit here, I've widened the scale a little bit. This would be a heavy lift, but is mildly competitive. And is also in the metro area. Okay, next slide, please. Congress. I know I said there really weren't any competitive districts, and there technically are not, because they're just outside the range. But if you squint a little bit, you can see that, as you know, you can see that this could be considered competitive districts. House or Congressional District 2 and Congressional District 12. Currently, the current congressional districts are 8 Republicans and 6 Democrats. Our model predicts with the House District 6 or Congressional Districts changes to Congressional District 6, a 9-5 split. And unfortunately, flippable goes both ways. So this is flippable, but it's Democratic to Republican, and it's House District 6. Next slide, please. So again, you can see that this is actually technically just outside and just below the competitive district mark. But I've again cheated a little bit and called it competitive. Those are as competitive as it gets. And they cranked Lucy McBath's district all the way down to like a 41% partisan. Next slide, please. Nested districts. as I was saying, when we used our nested district strategy in 2018 and 2020, we had a large congressional district, which was Congressional District 7, in the Gwinnett County area. And there were many of those Gwinnett House and Senate districts that fit inside that. Now that the Congressional District 7 has been made very safely Democratic, and Congressional District 6 has been made safely Republican, the focus has shifted to the metro area, or to the rural areas. So in Congressional District 2, shown here, there are some nested districts there, and in Congressional District 12, there's one here. So there are really kind of minimal opportunities for nested districts with congressional districts. However, with the Abrams race for governor and Warnock race for senator, you can really consider the entire state a nested district. So we can get some bang for our buck there. Next slide, please. Okay, so our next steps really are to determine how we want to support these candidates. And it could be, if you're going to do things like postcard and phone banking and even fundraising, you don't have to be in the metro area. Geography doesn't really make that much of a difference. If you're going to do canvassing on the ground, it does. You're probably not going to drive south of Columbus to go canvassing. So we need to determine what it is we're doing. After March, candidates will have been declared and qualified for specific districts, so we can see who is actually running. And again, the situation is still very fluid, and about every other day you see a notice from somebody that they've decided to do something else, run for a specific district. So we need to identify our candidates, and then we can select target districts and candidates and decide on a plan of action. So questions, comments? I know this is a lot. It's like drinking from a fire hose when you when you look at all this stuff. I'm watching the chat for questions. So anything?
Karen, can I make just a request, just because
Sure.
we're running so late? Can you watch the chat, and can people put questions in the chat?
Sure.
And can you answer them in the chat?
Yep.
And we will definitely be sending all of this out. And I have to do a little mea culpa about time, because this information was so valuable, and I knew it was a whole lot of data, and I asked Karen to speak very slowly. Because it was so much to absorb. So if you don't mind just tracking, if you don't mind just kind of seeing if questions arise in the chat. And I want to do just, again, an enormous, you can see how much work went into this, and huge, enormous gratitude. And I'm going to just suggest, as we turn this, can we just actually just even on visually, let me just take this off. Can we just do a little visual gratitude to Karen for all of her magnificent data? And I'm going to put the next slide up, and Zan is offering to speak at the following meeting instead of this one. Zan, that would be fantastic. Thank you so much. Karen, did you want to say one more thing?
Do you want me to mention?
Yes, you do. Please,
Okay.
please.
And again, very, very quickly, and part of it is because I don't have very much information. You may be getting emails from campaigns about a proposed bill, House Bill 332, that has been introduced into, it's still in committee, that would amend a bill that was passed last year regarding fundraising during the session. It is difficult to tell whether this thing actually has legs or not. But from what I understand from Becky, the Abrams campaign lawyers have been meeting and have determined that in fact, it could be passed. If it were passed, it could be implemented as soon as early as early next week. And it would forbid challengers to incumbents from fundraising during the regular session, just like incumbents. So that would mean you couldn't donate to candidates who were not incumbents during special session. That's all I know about it. My suggestion, I mean, I went and I made some donations like right before this meeting, just on the off chance that it might be the case. So it's dastardly and it could be implemented apparently in a flash.
And thank you, Karen. Thank you so much. And PJ, we are turning this back over to you. PJ, you're muted.
How about now? Can you hear me? Okay. All that for nothing. I'm not going over that. Okay. We're going to talk about troublers reports. Okay. And the first person that this is the order in which it's going to go, ladies and gentlemen. The first report will be from Karen Davenport. She's going to be talking about the legislative committees. The second report will be Robin Shahar about criminal justice reform. Next will be Martha Laird about Laird about the candidate voter protection and the candidate directory. And so we will begin with Karen Davenport.
PJ,
Get out
can I
the
share
vote.
my screen quickly?
Sure.
Okay. So I know that we're going to finish by 5:30. I just want to share some things quickly because we talked about what's going on at the state. Can everyone see my screen?
No.
No, you can't see my screen.
Is there anything I need to do, Karen?
I thought you did it already, but let me see. It should say, okay.
Try it now, Karen.
Okay. I'm sorry. Can you see it now?
Nope.
Oh, you guys, sorry.
No worries.
It says multiple people can share.
Hit the green button to share the screen. Click on the screen you want to share, and then there's another click to share it.
Can you see it now?
No.
Okay, I'm not sure what's going on, but we don't have a lot of time. It usually shares quickly. Normally, when you do the share screen, oh, I see. Okay, I've got it. Can you see it now?
Yep.
Yes.
All right. So very quickly, we've been talking a lot about what's going on at the state level. I want to talk specifically about DeKalb because I really think about what we're doing at DeKalb can particularly be used in what Karen is talking about in terms of what we're going to do in the other areas. As I talked to you the last time, we have a couple of things we're focusing on. Our mission, obviously, is to take the governor's mansion, keep the House and the U.S. Senate, and turn the gold dome blue. We have two strategies that we're doing that by: conveying effective messaging and strengthening our grassroots precinct infrastructure. The first strategy is called Ambassadors for Truth, and Ambassadors for Truth, the focus is to drive a message rather than react to Republican media narratives, to reinforce the message that we as Democrats stand for caring, fairness, and responsibility, and to complement themes for our candidates and reinforce party platforms positions. We are focusing on certain types of information for the months of February and March. We're talking about healthcare, April, May, infrastructure, business and education, June and July, safe water, clean air, and safe homes. August and September, planning for the future environment. And this voting rights, we're doing it all the time. We're going to infuse the voting rights into everything we're doing. We're going to approach this several different ways through flyers, phone banking, bumper stickers, letters to the area, various events, and collaboration with other groups. That's our first strategy of what we're going to be doing. The second one is we're going to be increasing the number of precinct captains and block captains and participation, kind of encouraging people to kind of keep at this. This is a list of precincts we have without captains. I'm going to be forwarding this information to Becky and Pat. And we definitely want anybody that you know, anybody in organizations, we want to encourage them if they're interested in becoming a part of precinct and block captains. I also want to bring to your attention, if for some reason you're interested in any of these things, please do not hesitate to contact me or let me know. I also want to bring to your attention quickly, if for some reason you are not receiving this newsletter from the state Democratic Party. Can you see this? It says Georgia Democrats.
Yes.
Okay. There is a newsletter that's being sent out once a week that's an update from the state Democratic Party. If you are not receiving this newsletter, please email me so we can make sure you get on the list. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Karen. Robin, Shahar, would you give us a report on the criminal justice reform?
Yeah, just it'll take 1 minute. So Senate Bill 403, which is the co-responder bill that we've been talking about for months now, had a hearing before the Senate Health and Human Resources Committee on Wednesday and passed out of it unanimously. The hearing was really pretty wonderful. People talking about how it would change lives. So I think it has to go to the Rules Committee next, and then a full Senate hearing, probably not this week, but the week after, and then over to the House. I can answer questions for anybody if they have them. That's it for me.
Okay, any questions?
And I also want to say there are a bunch of people on this call who are part of this effort, and I'm not going to list them, but thanks to all of you.
Okay, no questions? Okay, Martha, voter protection. Can you talk about voter protection?
I can, but I'm going to, if you don't mind, I'm going to start with the other one. And in light of time, I'm not going to do the candidate directory, but contest every race, because as we heard many times during different presentations today, March 11th is the deadline for filing for running for office in November. And contest every race is trying to ensure that there is a Democrat running for every office that's on the ticket in November. And what they need help doing is actually contacting people who are potential candidates and urging them or connecting them with resources that will help them actually run. So they have already picked out people who are potential candidates. All we have to do is call them. You don't have to know anything about what it takes to qualify. All you have to do is connect them to the resources that Contest Every Race will give us. I did it last time. It's actually sort of fun. Some people are totally flabbergasted that you're calling them, and some people are very eager to get connected with the resources, and nobody was mad. So it's a fun thing to do. And Pam Woodley is the person that who will be contacting you if you're interested. So put your name in the chat and we would give Pam your contact information. Very quickly with voter protection, this is not quite as time specific as the other one was. Right now we have a team of 34 people working on this. Most of us are troublers, about 6 are not. And it doesn't matter, but there are 34 of us working on this effort. And the major thing that's happening now is we're getting ready for the May and November elections. So we're working with local board of elections, gathering information, being sure their information is correct, working with the voter protection team of the Democratic Party of Georgia. And some of this, and each person has about 5 to 6 counties that they're working with from now till November. Right now, we're in a phase of website research. We'll be in other phases as this rolls out that Sarah Draper, the director, will be giving us assignments to do. I can't tell you what those are because we don't know yet, but it all is focused on getting people the information they need and it being correct. So if you're at all interested, put your name in the chat for, get this, CSRR, County Survey Rapid Response is the name for it. So put your name, CSRR, and I'll contact you and tell you a little bit more about it.
Oh, okay, any questions? Okay, I want to thank all the travelers for your comments. And right now, we are going to ask Miss Karen Davenport to grace us with an excerpt from Amanda Gorman's amazing new book.
Yes, I'm going to read a little bit from her poem, The Hill We Climb. Scripture tells us to envision that everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. If we're to live up to our own time, then victory won't lie in the blade, but in all the bridges we've made. Because being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it. We've seen a force that would shatter our nation rather than share it, would destroy our country if it meant delaying democracy. And this effort very nearly succeeded. But while democracy can be periodically delayed, it can never be permanently defeated. In this truth, in this faith, we trust. For while we have our eyes on the future, history has its eyes on us.
All right. That was beautiful. Just simply beautiful. Thank you so much. Okay, so now we made it. Okay, we're a couple of minutes over.
Just a few minutes over.
This is rough. I might give this job up. Okay.
You're fine. You're fine. Thank you.
We made it, everyone, and thank you so much for coming. I want to, Becky, unless you have something else to say.
No, I just want to say, PJ, you did an awesome rocket job. Thank
You're
you
right,
for
PJ.
everything.
You're
Thank you for your
right.
leadership.
You're fine. Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen. Well, we're gonna end today's meeting, and our next meeting will be March the 13th. And we're reminding everyone again about our first diversity, equity, and inclusion training that will be February the 27th. And for everyone that's listening, I would recommend you at least come to that one before you make up your mind that you may not want to do this. We attended it, we had a brief one, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and it'll be worth your time.
Yes.
Okay.
Great.
So without further ado, and I don't know if the major is still on, but I got news for him. California's the Rams are gonna win this today. Okay.